Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Damali Abrams. For everyone who wasn't here for the earlier introductions, I'm one of the coordinators for today, and I stepped in for Nina Felshin, who's the chair of this panel. She had a personal emergency, and so I'm taking over for her today. We have two great panelists with us. Also, one of the panelists wasn't able to make it. So it's going to be a nice, intimate discussion between Dred and Mona. The panel is called When the Personal Becomes Political, Creative Activism / Collective Intentions. Born of the burgeoning feminist movement of the late 60s and early 70s, The Personal is the Political is still a useful framework for examining today's creative activism. The methods of working collectively and employing performative techniques, no matter the politics, gender, ethnic, or racial makeup of the group, also echoes feminist practices. Demonstrating the public dimension of private experience, contemporary activist art brings to light hidden realities and gives voice to the silenced. Activist art collectives question dominant cultural representations and configurations of power, seeking to empower individuals and communities and ultimately to stimulate social change. Such collectives often form in response to a community, national, or global event or events, existing for a finite period. Positioning themselves both in and out of art venues, their focus is always the wider world. Two collectives will be represented today on this panel. So I'm just going to read the bios of both of the panelists, and then we'll get right into their presentations. AWAM, Arab Women Active in the Arts and Media, 2003 to 2009, provided young women and girls with leadership opportunities and training in community organizing, art, and media production. Panelist Mona Eldari, who co-founded AWAM, tells the story of her evolution from activist to popular educator to healthcare provider, a path becoming increasingly common among community organizers. Mona is an acupuncturist, herbalist, and birth doula. Mona will discuss how popular education led her from community organizing and international issues to local issues and then into a career in healthcare. And she's one of the co-founders of AWAM. Postcode Criminals, 2011 to 2012, a collaboration between artists Dred Scott and Joanne Kushner and young adults aged 14 to 22 from Brooklyn, New York, and Liverpool, UK, examined the effects of criminalization of youth in both of these communities. Kushner, Scott, and the young adults used cell phone cameras, collage, poetry, and video to address the effects of stop and search and stop and frisk and other police intrusion into their lives. Panelist Dred Scott is an interdisciplinary artist whose work is exhibited across the US and internationally. For 3 decades, he has made work that encourages viewers to re-examine cohering norms of American society. In 1989, the entire US Senate denounced his artwork, and President Bush I declared it disgraceful because of its use of the American flag. His art has been exhibited and performed at MoMA PS1, Pori Art Museum, Finland, BAM, and galleries and street corners across the country. He is a recipient of grants from Creative Capital Foundation and the Pollock Krasner Foundation, and his work is included in the collection of the Whitney Museum. Nina Felshin is a curator, writer, and activist whose pioneering work, But Is It Art? The Spirit of Art as Activism, 1995, explored the emerging field of creative activism.
Sure, I can start. So I hope my talk isn't too broad. I hope it's more helpful than harmful to talk about art, but also talk about community organizing and healthcare. When I think about the term, the personal is political, I think about popular education, which is what a lot of my work has been based on in organizing. And for those of you who don't know, pop-ed is basically a technique where people come together, share personal experiences, and those personal experiences form their work, basically. Rather than coming together, let's say we want social justice, rather than coming together and talking about racism and sexism, we could come together and just talk about my personal life. What do I do every day? What are my challenges? And what do I need personally? And then when those experiences come together in a group, that's what forms the action. And so to bring it back several years, I started out a long time ago as an organizer in the pro-Palestinian movement, calling for an end to U.S. aid to Israel, etc. And in that work, at the time I was working with El Auda, the Palestine Right of Return Coalition, and was seeing, we would go out canvassing. We would go out to different neighborhoods anytime we had an action or needed membership or whatever. We would just reach out in different communities. And I started to notice that when we reached out in, let's say, 125th Street, Harlem, we got much better responses and really got a lot more out of it than if we went out to Grand Central Station, say. And then if we were in, say, an Arab neighborhood in Brooklyn, even better, right? And so I saw the need, and many of us saw the need for more outreach within the community. And just to bring it into academia for a moment, it is true that the people who are most likely to take action, to change policies or make change at all, are the people who are adversely affected by those policies. So I and a number of others formed, well, okay, before we go there was also a lot going on at that time. This was after September 11th. There was a lot of surveillance in our communities, meaning Arab communities, Muslim communities, communities of color, a lot of disruption happening, and people were being harassed on the street. This was when organizations were bringing together volunteers to actually walk people to and from school, to walk people to and from work, because there was that much harassment. And so there was intimidation, and so it was a situation where young people, including myself, were being told by their parents, you know, what's happening to you is wrong, but don't take action. And that's extremely unhealthy for adults and certainly for children. So then came AWAM, Arab Women Active in the Arts and Media. We were a popular education-based organization. We had some collective decision-making in different areas. And we started out running programs for young women. We were training young women who were Arab, Muslim, or women of color in how to organize, how to be a highly effective organizer, and how to produce media and use that media in your organizing. And a lot of what we produced back then was called buy and for. We called it buy and for pieces. So media that was made by the same community that it was going to be screened for, right? Or shown in whatever way. Whether it was radio, video, DJing, t-shirt printing. So this went on for some time. And then in 2007, we became involved in sort of a high-stakes, high-profile campaign to support the Khalil Gibran International Academy, which was the first Arabic language, dual-language public school in New York. The school was basically some of you may remember, this was the principal of the school was asked by the New York Post to define the word intifada, and she did. And then because of that, the mayor forced her to resign from her position, and the Department of Ed and the mayor did everything in their power to destabilize the school for the months and years that followed. So our work at that point took a turn. It was difficult, increasingly difficult, to really use that pop ed model, although we continued to, but we were also more reactive. All of a sudden, there was all of this media coming from all of the major publications about the school and also about our organization, because it was we who produced a T-shirt with the slogan Intifada NYC that the press latched onto, and then sort of targeted it toward the principal. So we ourselves were under attack, being called a pro-terrorist organization. Our members were personally under attack. And then, of course, the school, which was such an important addition to the community, was under attack. So our work took an interesting turn because we had to be reactive. We had to also be defensive in a way. One of the things we did, in addition to starting a campaign to support the school, a coalition-based campaign, was we started something on a smaller scale called the I Word campaign, to say, okay, who gets to define our words? Intifada is an Arabic word, and it's an extremely empowering word. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, intifada, if you look it up in a dictionary, it means to shake off. For example, if you were to shake off, a rug or anything, dust yourself off. It's also used to mean revolution. And the most popular use of the term intifada is to describe the Palestinian resistance to Israeli occupation. So this was a campaign. I bring it up because it kind of echoes what we heard in the recent panel about who gets to define our language, who gets to define our words. And so in the end, at this point, we were a growing organization, and we had partial funding for everything we did. We had part-time staff, and we got into this full-time campaign in self-defense. And so we got burnt out, and we also got underfunded, because as soon as we got involved in this campaign, the steady growth and development of our funding from foundations took a steady decline. And this was well before the economic decline of 2008. So I learned what I'm sure many of you have learned, which is that art and education is a lot easier to fund than community organizing and political work, and also that organizing should not be done with funding from outside of the community, because if your work is funded by another community, obviously they might not have the same ideas and the same priorities as your community. And this is work, of course, you're probably familiar with Insight's work, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, discussing the nonprofit industrial complex. So these are stories, our story is not unique. This happens again and again. So for myself, this was an opportunity to sort of go back to pop ed, not as a facilitator, but sort of, as the subject, I guess, and ask myself, well, what's in my own backyard and what's important to me? And so in looking in my backyard, the healthcare kept coming up, because I had loved ones who were lacking proper healthcare, right? Either because they didn't have access, they didn't have health insurance, or for those who did have health insurance, only had access to the types of treatment that insurance would provide, right? I had also attended a labor of a loved one, and saw that her life and the life of the child were put at danger because high-risk interventions were used before without low-risk interventions ever being considered. When I say high-risk interventions, I'm talking primarily about medication and surgery, and low-risk interventions are, things like diet and acupuncture, for example. So this is, I thought to myself, okay, if I become a healthcare practitioner, at the very, very least, at least I can provide some care to the people I care about and for myself. And again, this is a story that you've heard before, the burnt out, overworked, underpaid activist. And we see it so much. So many people are doing such good work and not taking care of themselves. So I also hoped that me becoming a healthcare practitioner would in some way support activists and activist work that I cared about, just by being able to provide treatment to organizers and activists at a low cost. So I'm not the only one who's made this transition. I know a number of organizers who have gone into healthcare for basically the same reasons. And I'm looking forward to seeing what comes from that, because, well, this isn't a new thing, okay? This has been happening for a long time. Back in the 60s, acupuncturists played a huge part in the work of the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the takeover of Lincoln Detox. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes from this at this particular time, when a cadre of community organizers and community-minded people and social justice-minded people have entered healthcare and are saying, okay, why are high-risk interventions prioritized? Why is the majority of the money, tax dollars and out-of-pocket dollars that are paid to the healthcare industry going directly into the pockets of, health insurance companies? And Yeah, also really glad to be here and talk about this in the context of art. Thanks.
I'm going to try talking from the podium. I hope that's okay. And I'm just sort of noticing that the slide that was up the entire time was from one of my projects. So not what I requested, but I hope you will understand that it's not my intent to have my slide above Mona's talk. Anyway, I'm going to talk about a couple projects. The first is a project called Postcode Criminals, which is a multi-headed project that was collaboration between myself, Joanne Kushner, who is the woman in the center, and young adults from Liverpool and from East New York, neighborhoods in Liverpool in England that are similar to East New York, which has the highest rate of stop and frisk in New York City. 93% of the residents in East New York and Brownsville were stopped by the police at the height of stop and frisk, and neighborhoods like Toxteth and Norris Green are similar to that in the UK. And so how this project came about was I'd been doing a lot of work around the criminalization of youth, and just not thinking about neighborhoods a whole ocean away. And I get an email from Joanne who says, "Look, I'm in town. I would really love to meet with you. I'd like to talk with you about a project I'm doing." I'm like, all right, how did some woman in Liverpool hear of me? I guess I make art. Maybe it got an article somewhere. So we get together and she says, "Hey, I really want to work with you on a project about the criminalization of youth because we're facing a situation similar to what you face in New York." I'm like, this is interesting. And she said, Police Chief Bratton, who at the time we started the project, 2011, was the former police chief under Giuliani, who had gone over to England, and he met with his counterpart, Ray Mallon, and they instituted sort of the precursor to stop and frisk in a sort of broken windows policing, which now we're all starting to see the effects of that, particularly after it became sort of in the news around the police murder of Eric Garner in Staten Island. So in 1996, the development and thinking about, just punish everybody for any minor infraction. If they're selling Lucy cigarettes, if they're drinking in public, if their pants are sagging, if they're playing loud music, if their soccer ball hits a police car, all of those things that are should be criminalized. And if you arrest people and harass youth for that, then apparently you won't have murders or other high-level crime. That's the so-called logic that was given. So Joanne tells me all this, and I'm like, this is really interesting. And part of her thesis was that the UK was 10 years behind New York, and she really wanted to break that cycle. So she wanted the people in New York in Liverpool to learn from what was going on in Brownsville and East New York. And so we said, okay, let's collaborate. And Postcode Criminals came out of that. And postcode is the equivalent of zip code. And her understanding was that people are criminalized not just for their race or their economic status, but also based on where they live. And so I talked about East New York and Brownsville having a high concentration of stop and frisk. Well, it's not just that it's their neighborhood, but that was a convenient framework to talk about this. So she worked for about a year and a half with youth in these neighborhoods, and I worked for about a year. I started working with an organization called Man Up, which is an organization that's trying to break the cycle of gang violence, and it's in East New York and Brownsville. And so every week I met with youth sort of aged 12 to about 19, and I was teaching them photography. We were using cell phones to tell the story of this neighborhood that is sort of under occupation. We were having Skype sessions with the people in Liverpool, and the youth were making their art. Joanne and I were sort of making some of our art, and we were sort of talking about how can we make a project about the criminalization of youth that's displayed both in the community as well as in galleries and perhaps internationally. So these are some of the youth that I work more directly with. This is in Rush Arts Gallery, and these are all youth from East New York and Brownsville, mostly East New York. And this is the installation, part of the installation that came out of it. This is a wall inside Rush Gallery. So the photograph before was youth going to this gallery to sort of see it, and we talk about, well, how would our work look in this space? And most of the kids had never been to a gallery, but they really liked the idea, we can have our voices heard in this, sort of in the Chelsea art world. This is collage work that came out of England. None of this is from America. And then these are some of the project, another way the youth wanted. Joanne said, that a lot of the youth really felt that they wanted to talk about the history of how youth are looked at, and she said that it was important to actually portray the youth sort of as Renaissance paintings, emphasizing that this is something that's been going on for a while, and the youth really dug that. So she taught the youth lighting, she taught them studio photography, and so these are some of the portraits that resulted from that. And these are some of the street photography that some of the young men and women from Liverpool did. They were just documenting their neighborhood. Right here, it says FTM, which is Fuck the Matrix. The Matrix is not just a movie, but is actually what the police in England call their surveillance apparatus. They have the audacity, we call it the Matrix. And so, and they have tremendous surveillance that's wired directly into the cars, and so the youth get hassled and harassed by it all the time. And so these are some of the images that the kids there wanted to document of their neighborhood. Some of the neighborhoods in Liverpool are what we would call blighted. I mean, they're just block after block after block with one house or two houses. And the people that are living in the houses are actually sometimes really good houses. And the people don't want to leave because they know once they get torn down that they're going to have either expensive condos put up or much smaller government housing that their stuff won't even fit through the door sometime. And so these are communities that were really under assault. And the guy on my right, your left, he's actually a world-class track runner, but he gets stopped by the police all the time. All the time he gets stopped. And it makes him so he doesn't actually want to go out in his neighborhood. There's no place where he and some of his friends can rest. There were stories that we heard of kids in England who, one kid has been stopped, I think, 425 times in the course of a year. Sometimes he'll get stopped on his way home from school by 3 different police jurisdictions because he's got what's called a antisocial behavior order, which means he can't associate with other youth his age. So he walks home from school with other youth, and cop 1 stops him half a block from school. Cop number 2 stops him 3 blocks from school. Cop number 3 stops him a half mile from school. But he just can't walk. I mean, and it's, these youth just, it is constant harassment. And so these are photographs that came out of the New York side of the project. These are all cell phone photos, mostly cell phone. 1 or 2 of them are just digital cameras that were taken of their neighborhood. And I hope I have some details. Yes. So this is the danger restricted area sign was put up when there was construction. The guy who took the photograph lives in the housing block that's just behind that. The sign was left up for years. This was 3 years after it was put up, and he's horrified that his neighborhood is being called this dangerous place, and that there's nothing he can kind of do about it. And yes, it is a dangerous neighborhood, but the stigma of having people just walk by and say these are criminals, this is a restricted area when it's his house. And so I'll go through some of these without much comment, but just seeing the pervasiveness of the police in the community. Oh, this was shot, he's 12, and during the time we were doing the project, Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman. And so these kids very much felt that it could happen to them. If any of them could be next. So he took his selfie. This is one of the best selfies I've ever seen. He just pulled his hoodie up, put a bag of Skittles in his mouth, and did this. And the pictures varied. Some of them were just, this is my neighborhood. And this is what living under occupation is like. This is the daily routine for a lot of these kids in this neighborhood. I mean, cops going to work as an army and, 6-year-old, 5-year-old kids just getting used to see this army of blue occupying their neighborhood. And so this is STOP. This is a project that I did with these youth, both, it's a 2-channel projected video, and in sort of highfalutin art speak, a channel is just one side, like one television channel or something like that. So they're one wall, the wall on your right is young men from East New York, and the wall on your left, my right, is East New York, and the opposite wall is Liverpool, and I'll just show you a video that is an excerpt of this piece.
I've been stopped 60 or more times. I've been stopped by the cops 150 times, probably a little bit more.
I've been stopped and searched more than 100 times.
I've been stopped 60 or more times.
I've been stopped by the police 30 times or more.
I've been stopped about 20 times.
Get stopped by the cops every day, but 150s, that about sums it up. Stopped about 60 times or more.
I've been stopped 70 times.
I've been stopped and searched more than 100 times.
I've been stopped a lot of
I've been
times,
stopped by the police
150.
30 times or more.
I've been
stopped.
stopped
Been
about
stopped about
70
20 times.
I've
60
been
times
stopped
or
and
more.
searched more than
I've been stopped
100
by the
times.
police 30 times or more.
I've been
been
stopped somewhere in the
70
hundreds,
times.
close to.
I've been stopped by the police 30 times or more. I've been stopped by the police 30 times or more.
I've been stopped 70 times.
I've been stopped 150 times.
I've been stopped and searched more than 100 times.
I've been stopped about 20 times.
Okay, this is a project called Wanted, which was done most recently, it was done this past summer, and it's a collaboration with myself, community activists, and youth, mostly from West Harlem. It is a project that it masquerades as wanted posters, which are just seen, on the streets of New York and in subways and stuff. And these are wanted posters that talk about things that the police harass youth for that are not illegal. And so wanted fits description, perpetrator, probable cause to stop and question. And so I'll show you a couple more wanted posters, but just remember that all the things that the fits description or wanted for furtive movement are things that when the police fill out their stop and frisk reports, they say of why they stopped somebody. So 10% of the more than 700,000 people that were stopped in 2012 were stopped because they fit the description of some known criminal, supposedly. The project came about, the drawings were done by a police sketch artist. This is Kevin Blythe Sampson on the right drawing, and he's getting a description from somebody who's seen a youth that is going to end up on a wanted poster. And so the project again was multi-layered. There were these wanted posters that were put up in the community. There were dialogues with people in the community, both youth and activists. There was a sketch session that happened sort of as a performance, and there were the dialogues when the posters got put up in the community. And I'm going to show you part of a video that shows the sketching session, and then show you some of the pieces in the community, and then we can maybe talk about it later. So let's.
You want to take a look through this at all and see if you see anything similar? Yeah. Let's take another look. You know, I want to keep going, and I want to add, I want to, darken her up and shade it, but I don't want to. She's so young, I don't want to put too much in her face, because the more I put in, the older she's going to get.
As part of this artwork, several young adults and activists met in Harlem to discuss police intrusion into the lives of youth and how the youth are criminalized.
And remember, we're going to build a face, so all we're looking for right now, and I don't want to give you too many, is the shape of the face.
The following day, 5 adults gave descriptions of 5 youth, who they only briefly met, to Kevin Blythe Sampson, a police-trained composite sketch artist. Sampson made sketches based on these descriptions.
All right. So the way we do a composite is, first I want to get a physical description of you, which I want a description of the suspect. I want to write that down, just casually I want to write that down. After I do that, we're going to start building a composite. What we're looking for is we're not trying to make a portrait, we're trying to make a likeness. Could I ask you how long you saw the person for?
1 minute.
Just a minute? Wow, it's going to be fun. You saw him for 1 minute, okay. Is this a male or female?
Male.
It's a male, good. The race?
Dark skin.
Dark skin. Could you tell if they were African American, Hispanic, or you couldn't? Okay. By dark skin, you mean dark skin, dark?
Dark light skin.
Okay. Dark, light skin. Okay, we'll show you pictures.
So not dark?
Dark as I am?
No.
Okay.
A little lighter.
Lighter than I am. Okay. Would you say that that person was thin, fat, medium? So we have a a dark-skinned male, early 20s, clean-shaven, slim, with pointy eyes. What color would you say he was out of these pictures? Do you see anything here?
Yeah, maybe these are.
These colors, okay. So a face shape. Let's start out with the shape of her face.
I want to say that it was.
There's many more pictures, so. What I'm going to do now is just make a light drawing. I'm going to just block in the face real quickly, and as we go along, we'll redefine it. And you said, but they were fuller than these lips.
Yeah, a little bit more,
Okay.
but
That sort of shape.
So part of doing this as a performance was to get people to question the authenticity and integrity of any of the.
Would you describe this guy as, I hate to put you on the spot, handsome, ugly, normal, a generic looking guy?
handsome.
Handsome, okay. If it doesn't look like him, say it. We keep working. Let me just put hair in here.
So this doesn't go much longer, but I'm going to pause it and then go on to some images of the wanted posters. If you're really interested in seeing this, you can look on my
Darker
website
caramel.
and find it.
Okay.
And so these posters came out like this, wanted for furtive movement, perpetrator probable cause to stop and frisk. And then they had all these generic things that were language taken directly from wanted posters, like unknown, or unk, male, Hispanic, height, 5'10", weight, And then on Sunday, May 18th, 2014, at approximately 2:30 a.m., a male Hispanic, approximately 16 to 20 years of age, was wearing a black waist-length jacket and dark pants. The male was observed engaging in conversation with other males. The police allege that the perpetrator exhibited suspicious movements when officers approached. Suspect has been stopped and searched numerous times previously and is not armed and not dangerous. Suspect is known to associate with other teenagers in the vicinity. And then the suspect is wanted by his family, friends, and neighbors. To download copies of this poster and display it, go to www.wanted-project.com. And so the idea was, I mean, all these youth were sick of being harassed, and they said, yeah, put my face on one of these posters, and we were going to take the posters and put them all up around Harlem and to engage the community in conversation about how the youth are criminalized. And so I'll just sort of quickly go through a couple of the others. Wanted for unspecified reasons. Wanted for looking out. I mean, again, these are all things that the police, 9% of the people that were stopped were supposedly lookouts for some crime. So they would go up to somebody who's just staring out, and that's criminal for in 125th Street in Harlem or East New York and Brooklyn. Wanted for lifestyle choice. Bratton said when he'd conducted the biggest raid in New York City history on the Manhattanville and Grant housing projects in June of this past year, that part of the reason why they were holding young women at gunpoint when they were in their underwears or pointing guns at 6-year-olds and rousting people from their beds, and they had helicopters flying overhead. He said the reason we need to do this is we want to teach people that if you choose this lifestyle, this is what will happen. And so these got put up in delis and Chinese fast food places, on street lamps, on street posts and other ways. We made large versions that were just fly pasted up on construction sites. And there was no signage that said, this is an art project, engage it this way. Some people walked by and said, what the hell is this? Which is actually the response that we sort of wanted. But then we figured you'd see another block of them and another block, and then I have to read this. And then you start to understand, oh, this is about how youth are dogged and degraded and hassled and harassed. And that's it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you both. I'd like to start with a question before we open up. I think that one thing that came up in the earlier panels was about institutional white supremacy, and I think that is something that's coming up in both of your work as well. And Mona, you said something about not seeking funding outside of community for certain projects that were, I guess, subversive or that were counter to what, if you're going against the system, you're not looking to the system for funding for those kind of projects. But then it goes to the question of, okay, then we're looking to the system for healthcare, and we're looking to the system for law enforcement. And
I'm not looking to the system for law enforcement.
I'm not looking for the system for healthcare.
Right. That's great. Okay. Start there. Start there, please.
Well, I mean, look, I think that this is a system that was founded on slavery and genocide. You get 4 paragraphs into the U.S. Constitution, and you're talking about slavery. The cohering document that puts forward the vision of this country is supposedly based on freedom and freedom of expression, all that other stuff. It's based upon slavery. The underpinning of that society and the economic engine was slavery. That's their vision of freedom. And so you get down to today, you still, you go through slavery, then Jim Crow, then the new Jim Crow, which has mass incarceration, where 2.3 million people are currently in prison, 5 million are currently under the watch or control of some form of the criminal justice system. And you see, videos come out just yesterday of a Hispanic man walking down the street, fleeing from the police with his hands raised and shot on video. You get videos of Tamir Rice, who's playing with a toy gun, sitting by himself in a pavilion in Ohio. The police show up, and 2 seconds later, a black child is dead. You see situations where after they do that, his sister comes up and says what's going on. They arrest her and throw her in the back of the car and have her sit there while her brother bleeds out. The mother comes, and then they degrade her and say, well, you can either ride in the ambulance with your dead son, or you can ride with your child who we've got under arrest, his sister. I mean, this is how white supremacy is enforced in this society. It is institutional, and it's why looking for and trying to rely on the police to actually solve any problem that people have is going to result in worse things. When somebody probably as a joke called for the police to say that there was a man in Walmart in Ohio walking around with a gun, what do? They show up and they shoot somebody for holding a toy weapon that they have in that they sell in that store. And then they have the audacity to say, well, we're not going to prosecute them, the police who shot him, because that is what the police are trained to do. They feared for their lives. They were protecting the community. If that's not white supremacy and enforcing white supremacy, I don't know what is. Black people can't go into a goddamn store and pick up something in that store without fear for their life. And so, this notion of trying to rely on or look for the police for law enforcement, they are the problem. I mean, it's not that there aren't a lot of problems in these communities. I mean, in East New York, a lot of these kids, one of the guys in the project, as soon as he had a small son, he and his girlfriend moved out to live with her mother in Queens because they felt it was dangerous. They didn't want to grow up and run the risk of the kid getting a bullet from stray gang violence. So it's not that there aren't real problems, including of violence in these communities, but the police sort of stir things up and make it worse. And no matter how much they say that they're there to serve and protect, it is absolutely a lie. And I think that we need a radically different society. We need revolution. We need to get to a point where we don't have an unequal and unjust and divided society that requires police to enforce these divisions and enforce this oppression. And so we need to actually get rid of this system, and we can't look to try and solve it by saying, well, how can we have body cameras? There were body cameras that captured many of the murders that I talked about. There were cameras that saw that, and still no prosecution. We don't need more sensitivity training. They have sensitivity training since the 60s. It is institutional, and I guess I'll stop rambling, but I think it's a fault line thing of whether how do we look at stopping these murders, and what we need is precisely what we saw in the streets in response to the non-prosecutions and 9 indictments in Ferguson and Staten Island, of people of all walks of life, doctors doing die-ins and people in the streets doing sit-ins and shutting down bridges and highways and occupying police stations. That's what we need, and we don't need more of the current law enforcement that we have.
Thank you. Well, yeah, law enforcement's broken, healthcare is broken, and I think just to add to that, I think it's also important that we look at the criminalization of Black and Latino youth that's happening right now, and see the similarities between that and the mass detentions, the surveillance, the scapegoating of Muslims and Arabs.
Yeah.
So the healthcare system is broken. 2 things that a health practitioner, a doctor, say has to do in order to provide services and get paid is, number 1, identify their patient as sick, okay? Number 2, provide services and bill for each service. So this creates a system where, number 1, definitions of what is illness are getting broader and broader. Any of us could go to our doctor today and leave with a really nice medication for, because we've been in a bad mood lately or whatever, not to downgrade depression or anything like that. It's a very real and serious illness, but these definitions are getting broader and broader. And then after we've identified so many people as ill, so many people as eligible for hospice now when they should be in rehabilitation, or nursing homes when they should be in rehabilitation, then come the services. And the more services I as a doctor provide, the more money I make, right? Complementary and alternative medicine takes a different approach, right? It takes the approach that, number 1, it's preventative. It can be preventative, and that's the best kind of medicine. Number 2, even if an illness has already started, it's not about going for the big guns, right? It's about using surgery and medicine, sure, when it's necessary, but the problem, the system right now uses medicine and surgery as the first thing, right? I get so many people in my practice who have, chronic pain or whatever and have tried the medications, and now, okay, my doctor says surgery. And they've tried, they've gone with this for so long, and they're like, I just want to try something else. Well, why didn't your doctor tell you to come here and try something else? Acupuncture does work, actually, and can help so many people to avoid surgery. So there are alternatives to health insurance. There are alternatives to a system where pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies are profiting, off of our illness. And I would like to think that the government can provide that for us, but I don't think that we should wait for them to.
So do you see then your work, Dread, as motivating or inspiring the kind of revolution that you're talking about?
I think that my work concentrates looks at and focuses on key concentrations of social contradictions so that people can think about sharply. I mean, some of my work really gets people to look at the world and confront it as is, and some of it actually gets people to look at and dream and imagine how it could be radically different and far better. I don't think work by itself is a revolution. Art is not a revolution, but it can be part of a movement for revolution, which each of these projects were sort of intersecting and tied into. I mean, the Wanted project, a lot of the activists that were part of the conversations that were part of it were activists that were community organizers, getting people to be part of demonstrations against police brutality, against the criminalization of youth, against mass incarceration. And so it sort of intersected with what was already going on and then looked at it in a different way that actually got the community thinking about it. But the point is to help sort of advance things so that people no longer feel that they can need to or have to tolerate this unjust, exploitative, and unequal society. And then when there is a revolutionary situation and revolutionary organization able to lead that, then people are more enthusiastic about joining to that and joining the celebration so we can actually get free.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. The hand in the back, I think one up first. Oh, please wait for the mic.
As I'm walking, can I ask you, Dread, if you put your wanted posters on the Upper East Side?
They were available to download.
Might make a difference.
No, I would. I mean, if I had more bodies and people to do stuff, I would have done that too. It would have been a different sort of interpretation. But I mean, they're available. People can go to wanted-project.com, download them, put them up in your cubicles, put them up on the Upper East Side.
Since they started the terrorizing of humanity after the destruction of the towers by widely disseminating this concept of if you see something, say something, I kept imagining a kind of grassroots activity where people, a minimum of two, would go up to police people and say, yeah, I saw something. It was like a really great rainbow. The sunset was so nice. And so basically making a kind of political action and filming it with your cell phone. I mean, imagine a lot of people doing that.
Did you do that?
No, but this is what I think would be interesting if you started to create a kind of engaging theater rather than a confrontation, sort of making it into a positive, but you're breaking down that system of terrorizing people with this you see something, say something situation. It's just the idea of making political fun out of a kind of mocking but positive engagement, that's all. I admire this work you're doing.
I'd just like to say a response to that because Ellen DeGeneres had this challenge where she had people make videos of dancing behind someone, and this black guy danced behind a police officer and they slammed him on the ground and beat him up. So I don't think everyone can go up to cops and be playful and whimsical and have the same results. Yeah.
So I have a question for you. I'm teaching a class on community engagement. And when I speak with my students who are primarily non-white, they tell me that my privileged position as a white person makes me feel guilty, but they do not experience racism in the same way that I do, and that racism, that I'm actually creating racism by talking about it. And if we want to be post-racial, we have to stop talking about race. And this was just last week, and I sat there and thinking, oh my God, so can you help me respond?
You should go to that class, Dread. You have to go there, Dread.
Well, we can work that out. I mean, but no. I mean, the thing is that you and I do experience the world differently, but that doesn't mean you can't understand things I've experienced and I can't understand things you've experienced. I mean, I think it was Henry Louis Gates said, if you have to be of a subject to be an expert in the subject, then it's not a subject. And so I think people can, talk about race, regardless of what race, national origin, they are. But then, I think you do have to be respectful that sometimes it's not as, the mythology that people have now is that, oh, Martin Luther King happened and then Obama happened and we're in a post-racial society. Well, all the deaths after death after death and the incarceration, it's just not. And I think that, people that are white do have to listen to and learn from, but a lot of times if you have an understanding as a teacher, then bring that understanding. A lot of times kids don't know anything about the past, and they don't know actually, I was a kid once. I made a lot of highfalutin statements, and so I encourage you to, get in there and mix it up and, really interrogate yourself, but also have the courage of your conviction. If you're trying to be part of eliminating white supremacy and really go for eliminating white supremacy and make that the litmus test, then have a good conversation based on that.
I would say go online and get a workshop from SOUL, the School of Unity and Liberation, which identifies racism as white supremacy and a pyramid structure, hierarchy, and a system where one group is privileged, experiences privilege at the expense of another, and could guide you through eliciting personal experiences from the group to help them to understand that actually they have experienced racism and it continues.
Okay, sorry, we don't have time for any more questions. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.